The storm clouds gathered over Manhattan like an omen, casting shadows across the gleaming towers of power that stretched toward the heavens. On the 47th floor of the Ashford Industries building, rain lashed against floor-to-ceiling windows while inside, a different kind of tempest was about to unleash its fury. Camila Santos stood trembling before the mahogany desk that had once been a symbol of her lover's success, but now felt like an altar of sacrifice. Her usually perfect composure was shattered, vulnerability written across every line of her beautiful face. For 8 months she had been Dominic Ashford's secret stolen kisses in empty boardrooms, passionate nights in luxury hotel suites, whispered promises that had made her believe in fairy tales. But fairy tales, she was about to learn, could become nightmares in the blink of an eye. The envelope in her hands contained ultrasound images that should have brought joy, tiny fingers, a heartbeat strong enough to change the world, proof of love made manifest. Instead, those same images were about to become weapons in a war she never saw coming. "I'm pregnant, Dominic." The words that should have been celebration fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would destroy everything they had built together. He didn't look up from the merger documents spread across his desk, papers worth $2.8 billion that represented his life's ambition, his pathway to ultimate power. The silence stretched like a blade between them. Outside, thunder rumbled through the Manhattan sky, but inside that office the real storm was just beginning. When Dominic Ashford finally raised his head, those steel-gray eyes that had once looked at her with passion now held nothing but arctic indifference. She watched in horror as the man she loved transformed before her eyes into someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of cruelty beyond her darkest imagination. "Handle it," he said, his voice as cold as winter death. Welcome back, Golden Family. If you're new to our channel, hit that subscribe button right now and join our family of hopeless romantics who believe that even the most damaged hearts can learn to love again. And if you're already part of our community, you know that today's story is going to be something special. Now, let's begin. The city of New York stretched endlessly below, a concrete jungle where dreams were made and destroyed with equal ferocity. In the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, power was the only currency that truly mattered, and Dominic Ashford had spent his entire adult life accumulating it with ruthless precision. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in Ashford Industries' 90-year history, a company his grandfather had built with steel and sweat during the Great Depression. But where his grandfather had built with heart, Dominic had expanded with calculation. Every decision was measured against one simple metric: would it increase his power or diminish it? For 5 years, he had sacrificed everything on the altar of this ambition. Friendships, family relationships, his own humanity, all had been deemed acceptable losses in pursuit of ultimate success. He had become a machine designed for one purpose: the accumulation and wielding of power. But machines, he was about to learn, were vulnerable to the most human of emotions. Camila Santos had entered his life 2 years ago as his executive assistant, recommended by the most exclusive headhunting firm in the city. On paper, she was perfect: MBA from Wharton, fluent in 4 languages, impeccable references from previous positions at Fortune 500 companies. What the resume hadn't captured was the way her laugh could light up a room, or how her genuine compassion for others stood in stark contrast to the corporate sharks who surrounded him daily. She was everything his world wasn't: warm where it was cold, authentic where it was artificial, hopeful where it was cynical. Perhaps that's why he had been drawn to her like a moth to flame, despite every instinct telling him that mixing business with pleasure was a recipe for disaster. Their affair had begun innocently enough. Late nights working on the merger, shared takeout dinners in his office, conversations that stretched far beyond quarterly reports and market analyses. She had been curious about his life, his dreams, his fears, questions no one had asked him in years because everyone assumed that men like him didn't have fears. The first kiss had happened on a rainy Thursday evening, much like today. She had been reviewing contracts when a strand of dark hair fell across her face. He had reached out to brush it away, and suddenly they were looking into each other's eyes with an intensity that made the air crackle with electricity. "We shouldn't," she had whispered, but her body had swayed toward him. "I know," he had replied, but his hands had cupped her face anyway. That kiss had tasted like possibility, like everything he had been missing in his calculated existence. For 8 months, they had stolen moments between meetings, passionate encounters in his private suite at the Plaza, weekend getaways to his house in the Hamptons where they could pretend to be a normal couple in love. She had been his secret sanctuary, the one place where Dominic Ashford the CEO could become simply Dominic, a man capable of tenderness, vulnerability, even love. With her, he had glimpsed what life could be if he chose connection over conquest, heart over ambition. But glimpses, he was about to prove, were not the same as commitment. The ultrasound images Camila had shown him that morning should have been cause for celebration. The grainy black and white photos revealed what the technician had called strong fetal development. A baby due in 6 months, healthy and growing perfectly. She had been glowing with excitement, her eyes bright with tears of joy as she'd whispered, "We're going to be parents, Dominic. Can you believe it?" He should have swept her into his arms. He should have kissed her and told her that she had just given him the greatest gift imaginable. He should have started making plans for cribs and college funds and all the beautiful chaos that came with bringing new life into the world. Instead, he had felt only cold terror. A baby meant exposure. It meant explanations to his board of directors, many of whom were old-fashioned men who would question his judgment in mixing business with pleasure. It meant gossip in the financial press, speculation about his fitness to lead, whispers that he had lost focus during the most important deal of his career. Worse, it meant vulnerability. A child was a weakness that enemies could exploit, a pressure point that could be used against him in future negotiations. In his world, personal attachments were liabilities, and he had just acquired the biggest liability of all. So when Camila stood before him that stormy afternoon, clutching the envelope that contained proof of their love, Dominic made a choice that would define the rest of his life. He chose fear over faith, control over connection, power over the possibility of happiness. "I'm pregnant, Dominic." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. He didn't look up from his merger documents because he couldn't bear to see the hope in her eyes, couldn't face the trust she had placed in him, couldn't acknowledge that he was about to destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. "Handle it," he said, his voice as emotionless as a computer processing data. The silence that followed was deafening. He could hear the rain hammering against the windows, the distant hum of traffic 47 floors below, the soft intake of her breath as his words hit her like a physical blow. "Handle it." Her voice was small, broken, barely recognizable as the woman who had laughed in his arms just days ago. "This is our child, Dominic. Our baby." Finally he looked up and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Those steel-gray eyes that had once looked at her with passion and tenderness now held nothing but calculation. She was no longer Camila, the woman he loved, she was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, a threat to be neutralized. "No," he said, standing slowly with the deliberate movements of a predator stalking prey. "This is a mistake that threatens everything I've built." Each word was chosen for maximum impact, designed to wound and diminish. Camila felt herself shrinking under his gaze, the confident woman who had earned an MBA and climbed the corporate ladder disappearing beneath the weight of his rejection. "Let me be crystal clear," Dominic continued, moving around the desk with the casual confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. "You will terminate this pregnancy. Today." The casual cruelty of the demand stole her breath. This was the same man who had held her through thunderstorms, who had traced patterns on her skin while whispering about their future together, who had made love to her with a tenderness that had convinced her she had found her soulmate. "Dominic, please dash," she began, but he cut her off with a gesture that made it clear her words were irrelevant. "I'm not asking," he said, using every inch of his 6-foot frame to intimidate her. "I'm telling you exactly how this is going to go. I own this company. I own this building. I own half the legal firms in this city, and my family has connections that reach into every corner of New York's power structure." His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "If you think you can trap me with some pregnancy scheme, you're more naive than I thought." The accusation hit her like a slap. Trap him? She had never asked for anything from him except his love. She had never demanded marriage or money or any of the things that women supposedly wanted from wealthy men. She had simply loved him with her whole heart and believed that he loved her the same way. "Trap you?" The words came out as a broken whisper. "I love you, Dash." "You love my money," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her declaration like a blade. "You love my status, my power, the doors I can open for you. But if you think you can destroy my reputation and ruin my entire future with this..." He gestured dismissively at her still flat stomach. "You're dead wrong." Dominic walked to his private safe, a massive steel vault hidden behind a painting of his grandfather. The combination was his birthday, a detail that had once seemed romantic when he'd shared it with her during one of their intimate conversations. Now it felt like another weapon being turned against her. The envelope he retrieved was thick with cash, more money than most people saw in a year. He slammed it down on his desk with the casual arrogance of a man for whom $50,000 was pocket change. More than generous for a simple medical procedure, he announced, as if he were discussing a routine business transaction rather than the ending of their child's life. Camila stared at the money as if it were a poisonous snake. I won't kill our baby. Something ugly twisted his handsome features, transforming him into someone she didn't recognize. The mask of civility he wore in boardrooms slipped, revealing the ruthless predator underneath. Then let me explain your alternatives, he said, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed like a prosecutor delivering a verdict. Option 1. You take the money, handle this quietly, and keep your job. We go back to the way things were, and nobody ever has to know about this unfortunate mistake. The word mistake hit her like a physical blow. Their child, their love reduced to an error in judgment. Option 2, he continued, his voice growing colder with each word. I fire you for incompetence, blacklist you from every major corporation in the city, and make sure you never work in your field again. And believe me, Camila, I have the power to make that happen. Her face went white as the implication sank in. She had worked too hard to earn her position, sacrificed too much to build her career, to let him destroy it all with a few phone calls. You can't dash, she started, but he was already shaking his head. I can and I will, he said with casual certainty. I have friends on the licensing board for social workers. One call from me questioning your emotional stability after this incident, and your professional credentials disappear forever. The threat was surgical in its precision. He had identified her greatest vulnerability, her career, her independence, her ability to support herself, and was holding it hostage to get what he wanted. Try explaining a gap in employment and a revoked license to future employers, he continued, his smile growing more cruel. Try paying rent and student loans when no one will hire you. Try building a life when I've made sure everyone in your field knows exactly why you were terminated. Camila's hands trembled as the full scope of his power became clear. He could destroy her with a single phone call, leave her destitute and unemployable, make her disappear from professional existence as if she had never mattered at all. This is extortion, she managed to say. This is business, he corrected with cold precision. I protect my interests, eliminate threats to my objectives, and ensure that nothing interferes with my success. It's what separates winners from losers in this world. He straightened to his full height, towering over her trembling form like an executioner preparing to deliver the final blow. But there's a third option, Camila. One you really won't like. She stared at him in terror, unable to imagine how his cruelty could possibly escalate further. But Dominic Ashford hadn't become the youngest CEO in corporate history by showing mercy to those who stood in his way. I have security footage of you entering my private office after hours, he said, his voice carrying the cold precision of a legal document. Multiple times. I have hotel receipts, restaurant bills, jewelry receipts for gifts I've given you. Credit card records of our trips to the Hamptons. Each piece of evidence was a dagger to her heart, proof of their relationship being weaponized against her. With the right legal team, and I have the best lawyers money can buy, I can paint you as an unhinged employee who seduced her boss and is now trying to extort him with a fake pregnancy claim. The baby is real, she protested, but he wasn't finished. Prove it wasn't someone else's, he said with casual cruelty. Prove you didn't plan this timing to coincide with my merger. Prove you're not just another gold digger trying to cash in on a wealthy man's moment of weakness. The accusations were like acid, burning away everything she had believed about their relationship, about him, about herself. I'll bury you in legal fees before you can even file a paternity suit, he continued, his voice dripping with the confidence of unlimited resources. I'll make sure every newspaper in the city knows exactly what kind of woman you are. I'll ensure that your face is associated with corporate extortion and pregnancy fraud for the rest of your life. Camila was shaking now, tears streaming down her face as the full horror of her situation became clear. The man she had trusted with her body, her heart, her future, was systematically destroying her world piece by piece with the methodical efficiency of a demolition expert. How can you be so cruel? She whispered, the question torn from the depths of her shattered heart. His answer would haunt her for years to come, the moment when she finally understood that the man she had loved had never truly existed at all. Because I can, he said with the casual indifference of absolute power. Because power means never having to choose between what you want and what others need. Because in this world only the strong survive, and sentiment is a luxury I can't afford. He picked up the envelope of money, holding it out like a final offering from a vengeful god. Last chance, Camila. Take the money. And this. Walk away with your dignity and your career intact. It's more than most people in your position would get. She looked at the envelope, then at the monster wearing her lover's face. The man who had whispered sweet promises in silk sheets now stood before her, threatening to destroy her life for the crime of carrying his child. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. "Your mistake," he replied without a trace of remorse. Camila turned toward the door, leaving the blood money untouched on his desk. Every step felt like walking through broken glass, but she forced herself to move forward, to choose dignity over degradation, love over fear. "Camila." His voice stopped her at the threshold, cold and final as a tombstone. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see his face one more time, couldn't risk letting him see the tears that were falling like rain. "If you walk out that door without taking my offer, you'll regret it," he said, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I promise you that." She stood there for a moment, silhouetted in the doorway between her past and her uncertain future. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "I already regret it," she whispered to the empty hallway. "I regret ever thinking you were human." The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like the end of everything she had believed about love, about trust, about the possibility that good could triumph over ambition. Dominic stared at the envelope on his desk for a long moment, then swept it into the trash with the same casual indifference he might show to any other piece of unwanted paperwork. He had a merger to close, an empire to build, a destiny to fulfill. He never looked back, never wondered if she would actually go through with his demands, never allowed himself to think about what he had just lost. Because thinking about it might have meant admitting he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The elevator ride from the 47th floor felt like a descent into hell. Each floor that passed marked another step away from the life Camila Santos had thought she was building, another moment of falling from grace into an uncertain future that terrified her more than she dared admit. By the time she reached the lobby, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. The marble floors that had once seemed elegant now felt cold and unforgiving beneath her feet. The security guards who had greeted her warmly for 2 years now looked at her with suspicious eyes, as if they already knew she was about to become persona non grata in Dominic Ashford's world. The late afternoon rain had intensified, turning Manhattan streets into rivers of gray despair. Camila stood beneath the building's awning, watching yellow cabs splash through puddles while office workers hurried past with umbrellas and briefcases, all of them part of a world that suddenly felt alien to her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her best friend Jessica. "Dinner tonight? I have so much gossip to catch up on." The normalcy of it made her want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Jessica lived in a world where the biggest crisis was choosing between restaurants, where gossip meant celebrity breakups and office politics, where the future stretched out predictably like a well-planned vacation itinerary. Camila typed back, "Rain check? Not feeling well." It wasn't entirely a lie. She felt like she was drowning, suffocating under the weight of Dominic's threats and the impossible choice he had forced upon her. But how could she explain to Jessica that the man she had been secretly dating for 8 months had just threatened to destroy her life for carrying his child? The walk to her small apartment in Brooklyn felt like a death march. Every step took her further from the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, further from the life of luxury she had glimpsed in Dominic's world, further from the fairy tale she had been foolish enough to believe in. Her apartment, a studio in a converted brownstone, had always felt cozy and warm. Tonight it felt like a prison cell. The walls seemed to close in around her as she sat on her second-hand couch, staring at the ultrasound images scattered across her coffee table. The baby, her baby, was barely visible in the grainy black and white photos, just a small cluster of cells that somehow represented the most important thing in her world. At 8 weeks, the technician had explained, all the major organs were forming. The heart was beating strong and steady, a rhythm that had brought tears of joy to her eyes just hours ago. Now those same images felt like evidence in a crime she hadn't committed. The first blow came at 6:47 p.m., exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes after she had walked out of Dominic's office. Her work email account was deactivated without warning, cutting her off from projects she had been managing for months, from colleagues who had become friends, from the professional identity she had worked so hard to build. The second blow came the next morning when her keycard no longer worked at the Ashford Industries building. Security informed her with embarrassed sympathy that her employment had been terminated due to restructuring, a corporate euphemism that fooled no one. By noon, she received a call that made her blood run cold. The New York State Board of Social Work had received a formal complaint questioning her professional conduct and emotional stability. Her license was under review pending a full investigation that could take months to resolve. Dominic hadn't been bluffing. With surgical precision, he was dismantling her life piece by piece, just as he had promised. That evening, Camila sat in her apartment surrounded by the debris of her former existence: termination papers, investigation notices, unpaid bills that would soon become overwhelming without her salary. The ultrasound images lay in the center of it all like a beacon of hope in an ocean of despair. She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and whispered, "I'm sorry, little one. Mama doesn't know what to do." But even as she spoke the words, she knew what she had to do. Dominic's power was vast but not infinite. His reach was long but not global. If she stayed in New York, he would eventually succeed in destroying her completely. But if she disappeared? That night, Camila made the hardest decision of her life. She couldn't fight a billionaire with unlimited resources and ruthless determination, but she could become invisible. Using skills she had learned during her social work training, techniques for helping domestic abuse victims vanish from their tormentors, she began to systematically erase Camila Santos from existence. The process was methodical and heartbreaking. She closed her bank accounts, withdrawing everything in cash, barely $3,000 after rent and bills. She terminated her lease, forfeiting her security deposit but avoiding a paper trail. She sold everything she couldn't carry, accepting pennies on the dollar from strangers who sensed her desperation. Her grandmother's jewelry, passed down through 3 generations of strong women, went to a pawn shop in Queens. Her college textbooks, annotated with dreams of changing the world, were sold to a used bookstore in Brooklyn. Her professional wardrobe, carefully assembled over years of saving and planning, was donated to a women's shelter in the Bronx. With each possession that disappeared, Camila felt herself becoming lighter and more invisible. It was both liberating and terrifying, the kind of freedom that came from having nothing left to lose. The bus ticket to Philadelphia was purchased with cash at Port Authority, where she joined the anonymous masses of people fleeing from something or searching for something else. She chose Philadelphia randomly, pointing to a departure board and selecting the next city that felt far enough away but not so far as to exhaust her meager resources. But Philadelphia was just the first stop in a carefully planned journey designed to lose anyone who might be following her. She had learned from the women she had helped in her social work practice. Women who needed to disappear from abusive husbands, stalkers, and men who believed they owned the women they claimed to love. Philadelphia to Chicago on a Greyhound bus that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Chicago to Denver on another bus filled with migrant workers and runaway teenagers. At each city, she paid cash for everything, avoided security cameras when possible, and stayed in women's shelters that didn't ask too many questions about why a well-educated woman with no visible bruises needed a safe place to sleep. Denver felt different the moment she stepped off the bus. The air was thinner, cleaner than anything she had breathed in New York. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance like ancient guardians, making even her enormous problems feel small in comparison. Most importantly, it was nearly 2,000 miles from Dominic's sphere of influence. She found a tiny studio apartment in a converted warehouse, paying first month's rent in cash to a landlord who was more interested in having the unit occupied than in running background checks. The space was smaller than her walk-in closet had been in her Brooklyn apartment, but it had good natural light and a view of the mountains that reminded her daily that the world was bigger than one man's cruelty. Using her grandmother's surname Rivera, she created a new identity. Camila Santos Rivera had no connection to Ashford Industries, no history with billionaire CEOs, no reason to appear on any corporate security searches. As far as the official record was concerned, she was a recent widow who had moved to Colorado to start fresh after her husband's death. The lie felt appropriate somehow. The woman who had loved Dominic Ashford was dead. In her place was someone harder, more cautious, but also more determined to survive. Camila's transformation from corporate executive to invisible survivor is incredible, isn't it? Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are. If you're inspired by her strength, hit that like button. Finding work was more difficult than she had anticipated. Her impressive resume was useless without references she dared not contact, and her professional credentials were tied to a name she could no longer use safely. But necessity, she discovered, was a powerful motivator. She found her first job cleaning office buildings in the early morning hours, when the city was still asleep and she could work in relative anonymity. The pay was minimal, but it was honest work that left her hands raw and her back aching but her conscience clear. Her second job was tutoring immigrant children in the afternoons, her fluency in Spanish finally proving valuable in ways her MBA never had. The families paid what they could, sometimes in cash, sometimes in homemade meals, always with gratitude that made her feel useful again. The pregnancy was brutal in ways no textbook had prepared her for. Morning sickness lasted all day, leaving her weak and nauseous while she tried to work 3 jobs. Her body ached constantly and she was always exhausted, but she pushed forward because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering what she had lost. At her first prenatal appointment, using a clinic that provided care on a sliding fee scale, she learned something that changed everything. She was carrying multiple babies. Not just one child, but potentially 3 or 4, based on the preliminary ultrasound. The technician, a kind woman named Maria who spoke softly in accented English, confirmed what Camila had begun to suspect. Quadruplets, Mija. For babies. This is very rare, very special. For babies. 4 little lives depending on her strength when she felt anything but strong. That night, in her tiny studio apartment, Camila sat on her second-hand mattress and laughed until she cried. Of course it was quadruplets. Of course the universe had decided to make her situation 4 times more complicated, 4 times more expensive, 4 times more impossible. But as she pressed her hands to her growing belly, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving New York: hope. These weren't just babies, they were warriors, survivors who had chosen to exist despite every odds stacked against them. They were her second chance at family, her opportunity to build something beautiful from the wreckage of her former life. "Okay, babies," she whispered to her reflection in the cracked mirror above her bathroom sink. "It's going to be you and me against the world. But we're going to make it work, somehow." The pregnancy progressed with complications that tested every ounce of her determination. Carrying quadruplets meant constant medical monitoring, severe morning sickness that never seemed to end, and a body that seemed to rebel against the impossible task it had been given. By her second trimester, she could barely walk without assistance. Her belly had grown so large that simple tasks like tying her shoes or reaching for items on high shelves became impossible challenges. The doctors put her on modified bed rest, which meant losing 2 of her 3 jobs just when her medical expenses were skyrocketing. She survived on savings that dwindled rapidly, assistance from the women's shelter where she had first stayed, and the kindness of the immigrant families she had tutored. They brought her groceries, helped with household tasks, and treated her like family even though she was essentially a stranger who had appeared in their community without explanation. The legal work continued from her bed, translating documents on her laptop while propped up with pillows and surrounded by medical bills she couldn't afford to pay. Every dollar was precious, every expense calculated down to the penny, every decision weighed against the welfare of the 4 lives depending on her. The medical appointments became a routine of anxiety and wonder. Each ultrasound revealed 4 distinct personalities already emerging: one baby who was always moving, another who seemed to sleep constantly, twins who appeared to be holding hands in the womb, all of them growing despite the odds stacked against them. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, the maternal-fetal medicine specialist who had taken over her care, was blunt about the risks. Multiple births always carry complications. Preterm delivery is almost inevitable. Extended NICU stays are likely. The medical costs will be substantial. But she was also encouraging: your babies are fighters. They're growing well, their heartbeats are strong, and you're doing everything right despite very difficult circumstances. At 28 weeks, when most single pregnancies were still safely developing, Camila's body began showing signs that it had reached its limit. Contractions that the doctors hoped to stop with medication. Blood pressure that required careful monitoring. Signs that her body was preparing to deliver 4 babies who weren't quite ready for the world. The hospitalization came suddenly, on a Tuesday morning when she woke up with contractions that wouldn't stop despite the medication. The ambulance ride to Denver General Hospital was a blur of sirens and medical terminology she didn't understand, but one thing was crystal clear: her babies were coming whether the world was ready for them or not. Dr. Gonzalez met them at the emergency room with a team of specialists who had been preparing for this moment for weeks. "We're going to try to buy your babies more time," she explained as they wheeled Camila into the high-risk unit. "Every day they stay inside is precious for their development." For 6 days, Camila lay in a hospital bed hooked up to monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every contraction, every sign that her body was preparing for an event that would change everything. She worked on her laptop between medical procedures, earning what money she could to pay for the mounting hospital bills. The translation work had taken on new urgency. She was helping other women navigate the immigration system. Women who were also fighting for their children's futures in a country that didn't always welcome them. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She was hiding from a man who had the power to destroy her while helping other people hide from a system that had the power to separate them from their families. On the 7th day, at exactly 34 weeks gestation, Camila's body made the decision for everyone. The contractions became too strong to stop, her water broke in a rush that soaked the hospital sheets, and suddenly she was being wheeled into an operating room surrounded by more medical professionals than she had ever seen in one place. "It's time," Dr. Gonzalez said, her voice calm but urgent. "Your daughters are ready to meet the world." Daughters. 4 little girls who would never know their father's name but would know every day of their lives how much their mother had sacrificed to bring them safely into existence. The birth was a medical choreography of controlled chaos. 4 surgical teams, 4 incubators, 4 sets of monitors beeping in harmony as Camila drifted in and out of consciousness under anesthesia. When she woke up hours later, the first thing she heard was crying, not one voice, but 4 distinct cries that sounded like the most beautiful music she had ever experienced. Esperanza was born first, weighing 3 pounds and 2 ounces, her tiny fists already fighting against the world that had tried to prevent her existence. Hope, the name came to Camila instantly, perfect for the daughter who had led her sisters into life. Sophia followed 2 minutes later, quieter than her sister but with eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with startling intelligence. 2 pounds, 15 ounces of pure wisdom wrapped in translucent skin. Isabella arrived third, screaming with indignation at being removed from her warm cocoon, 3 pounds exactly of beautiful fury that announced her presence to everyone within hearing distance. Beauty personified, even at her smallest and most vulnerable. Paloma came last, the smallest at 2 pounds and 12 ounces, but when the nurse placed her tiny hand against Camila's finger, her grip was stronger than any of her sisters. Peace, the final gift, the completion of a miracle that had begun with violence and threats but had become something transcendent. 4 daughters. 4 perfect little girls who had survived everything Dominic Ashford had tried to take from them. 4 reasons to keep fighting, keep believing, keep building a life worthy of their incredible beginning. As Camila lay in recovery watching her daughters fight for their lives in the NICU, she made a promise that would sustain her through the difficult months ahead. "Mama will keep you safe no matter what. You will know love even if you never know your father. You will have everything I can give you, even if it's not everything the world says you deserve." The NICU became her second home for the next 2 months. She practically lived in the hospital, pumping breast milk every 3 hours, holding her daughters through the portholes in their incubators, working on her laptop during the brief moments when all 4 were sleeping peacefully. The medical bills mounted like storm clouds. NICU care for quadruplets was astronomically expensive, even with charity care and Medicaid covering what they could. But every day her daughters grew stronger, every ounce they gained, every milestone they reached, made the financial stress feel manageable in comparison to the miracle she was witnessing. The day they came home, all 4 of them healthy and thriving, Camila sat in her tiny apartment surrounded by 4 car seats, 4 cribs donated by the church, and enough baby supplies to stock a small store. She had exactly $67 in her checking account and no idea how she was going to manage 4 newborns while working enough to keep them fed and housed. But as she looked at her daughters, her miracle quadruplets who had defied every odd, survived every threat, and chosen to exist despite a father who had tried to prevent their birth, she felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible day in Dominic's office. Pure, unshakable hope. 3.5 years had passed since Camila Santos had vanished from Dominic Ashford's world like smoke in the wind. 3.5 years during which he had built his empire into something that would have impressed even his ruthless grandfather, tripling his net worth and establishing Ashford Industries as a global powerhouse that influenced markets from New York to China. The merger that had been so crucial on that stormy afternoon had been wildly successful, positioning him as one of the youngest billionaires in American history. His face graced magazine covers with headlines like "The Midas Touch" and "Power Without Limits." Politicians courted his endorsement, celebrities sought his attention, and business schools used his strategies as case studies in aggressive corporate expansion. Yet for all his success, Dominic found himself plagued by something he had never experienced before. Emptiness that money couldn't fill, achievements that felt hollow despite their magnitude, victories that tasted like ash in his mouth. Late at night, in his sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, he would sometimes find himself wondering about the woman who had walked away from his ultimatum. He told himself he was simply curious about whether his corporate investigators had been thorough enough, whether the problem had truly been resolved as efficiently as he had demanded. But in unguarded moments, usually after too much whiskey and too many hours staring at the city lights, he allowed himself to wonder what would have happened if he had chosen differently that day. What if he had swept Camila into his arms instead of threatening her? What if he had chosen love over fear, connection over control? These thoughts were dangerous, counterproductive, and completely contrary to everything that had made him successful. So he buried them beneath more work, more deals, more conquests that proved he had made the right choice in prioritizing his empire over sentiment. The corporate jet's engine failure over Denver was supposed to be nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Dominic had been en route to a board meeting in Seattle, another acquisition, another expansion of his ever-growing influence, when the pilot announced they would need to make an emergency landing for repairs that could take several hours. His assistant had immediately booked him into Denver's finest hotel, arranging for a luxury suite where he could conduct business while waiting for the mechanical issues to be resolved. The plan was simple: work from the hotel, maintain his schedule via video conferences, and treat the delay as merely another challenge to be managed with typical efficiency. But something about the mountain air, the different pace of the city, or perhaps just restlessness born of too many years spent in sterile boardrooms and identical hotel suites, drove him to leave the confines of his temporary office and walk the unfamiliar streets. Denver felt different from the cities where he normally conducted business. The people moved at a gentler pace, as if they had time to actually notice the world around them. The Rocky Mountains dominated the horizon like ancient sentinels, making even his towering achievements feel small in comparison to geological forces that had shaped the landscape for millions of years. He had been searching for a coffee shop, irritated by his inability to navigate the weekend farmers market that seemed to have taken over several city blocks, when he heard a sound that stopped him cold. "Mommy, can we get the face painting?" The voice was young, sweet, speaking in accented English that sent ice water through his veins and made his heart skip several beats. He looked up from his phone, following the sound through the crowd of families enjoying the Saturday morning sunshine, and his entire world shifted off its axis. Sitting at a small cafe table beneath a cheerful yellow umbrella, surrounded by coloring books, juice boxes, and the beautiful chaos that only children could create, was Camila Santos. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, and he had a perfect memory for details that mattered to him. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a casual bun that highlighted the elegant line of her neck and the golden tone of her skin. She wore a simple sundress that showed off curves that were softer now, more maternal, and her face held a serenity and contentment he had never seen during their time together in New York. But it was her smile that stopped his breath, completely radiant, unguarded, filled with pure joy as she looked at the 4 identical little girls surrounding her like flowers around the sun. Quadruplets. 4 perfect little girls with glossy black curls that caught the sunlight like silk, bright intelligent eyes that sparkled with curiosity and mischief, and faces that were unmistakably, heartbreakingly familiar. They couldn't have been more than 3.5 years old, chattering excitedly in a mixture of English and Spanish as they showed their mother their artwork with the pride that only children possessed. The math hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his knees weak. 3.5 years old. The timing was perfect, exact, undeniable. These were his children, the babies he had demanded she abort, the lives he had threatened to destroy, the future he had been too terrified and selfish to embrace. "Look, Mommy. I drew our house," one girl exclaimed, holding up a crayon drawing of a small home with 4 stick figures holding hands in the front yard, a mother and 3 daughters, with a 4th figure that had been colored over so many times with black crayon that it was just a dark smudge. "It's beautiful, Esperanza," Camila replied, kissing the child's forehead with infinite tenderness that made Dominic's chest ache with something he couldn't name. Another girl, identical to her sister but somehow distinct in the way she moved, the way she held her head, tugged on Camila's sleeve with the impatience of a child who had something important to share. "Can we go to the playground after this?" "Of course, Paloma. But first, let Sophia and Isabella finish their snacks." The names hit him like physical blows, each one chosen with care and meaning that spoke to the woman who had named them. Hope, peace, wisdom, beauty. Even in giving their daughters names, Camila had chosen love over bitterness, faith over fear, possibility over the darkness he had tried to force upon her. Dominic stood frozen in the crowded market, watching as Camila patiently helped one girl reach her juice box, praised another's coloring with genuine enthusiasm, and gently corrected a third for speaking with her mouth full. She was a natural mother, patient, loving, completely devoted to these 4 little beings who had never known their father's name but who clearly knew every day of their lives how much their mother loved them. She had kept them. Despite his threats, despite his cruelty, despite every weapon he had used to try to force her hand, she had chosen to bring his children into the world. More than that, she had raised them alone, in what appeared to be modest circumstances based on their simple clothes and the small amount of food on the table, rather than subject them to a father who had seen them as nothing more than obstacles to his ambition. The guilt crashed over him like a tsunami, threatening to drag him under with its sheer weight. While he had been building his empire and accumulating billions, she had been changing diapers at 3 in the morning, rushing to emergency rooms with sick children, celebrating first words and first steps and all the moments that made up the real substance of life, moments he had missed, love he had rejected, connections he had severed with his own cruelty. These 4 beautiful little girls were growing up without their father not because he was dead or absent through circumstances beyond his control, but because he had actively chosen his corporate merger over their very existence. They were fatherless because he had threatened to destroy their mother rather than accept responsibility for the life they had created together. The weight of that realization was crushing, more devastating than any business failure or financial loss he had ever experienced. These weren't abstract concepts or theoretical consequences. They were his daughters, living and breathing and laughing in the sunshine, perfect in every way except for the absence of the man who should have been their protector, provider, and guide. As if sensing the intensity of his stare across the crowded market, Camila looked up from helping Isabella with her juice box. Their eyes met across 30 feet of space and 4 years of silence, and he watched in real time as the color drained from her face like water from a broken dam. Recognition flashed first, a split second where she simply saw a familiar face in an unexpected place. Then shock as her mind processed who he was and what his presence here might mean. Finally, something that made his blood run cold and his heart hammer against his ribs. Pure, blazing fury that transformed her gentle features into something fierce and protective. She stood so quickly that her chair scraped against the pavement with a sound like fingernails on glass, the noise sharp enough to cut through the cheerful atmosphere of the weekend market. Several nearby families looked over curiously, sensing the sudden tension that had materialized from nowhere. "Girls, we need to go. Now," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic that her daughters had never heard before. The change in their mother's demeanor was so sudden and dramatic that all 4 little girls looked up with wide, startled eyes. Esperanza, who had been chattering happily about the face-painting booth, fell silent mid-sentence. "But Mommy," she started, confused by the sudden shift from peaceful mourning to urgent flight. "Now." The word cracked like a whip, causing Isabella to drop her juice box and Sophia to shrink back in her chair. Camila began gathering their things with frantic efficiency, coloring books, juice boxes, small purses, everything that marked their peaceful morning now scattered in her desperate haste to escape. But Dominic was already moving, pushing through the weekend crowd with the single-minded determination that had built his empire, the same relentless focus he had once applied to hostile takeovers now directed toward reaching his family. "Camila, wait." His voice carried across the market like a thunderclap, causing several people to turn and stare. But she didn't wait, couldn't wait, wouldn't risk her daughter's safety for even a moment of conversation with the man who had once promised to destroy them all. She scooped up Isabella and Sophia in her arms while Esperanza and Paloma scrambled to follow, their small legs struggling to keep up with their mother's sudden urgency. The sight of his daughters, running from him like he was some kind of monster sent a knife through his chest. "Mommy, why are we running?" Paloma asked, her voice trembling with confusion and the first stirrings of fear. The question broke something in Camila's chest, but she couldn't stop to comfort her daughter, couldn't explain that sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you became the very ones you needed protection from. She could only keep moving, keep her children close, keep them safe from the man who had the power to destroy everything she had built. They disappeared into the weekend crowd like smoke, leaving Dominic standing alone among the abandoned remnants of their interrupted morning. The small cafe table looked like the scene of some disaster, coloring books left open to pictures of happy families, juice boxes with cartoon characters smiling up at the empty sky, a forgotten hair ribbon that one of his daughters had been wearing. 4 daughters. His daughters. Living, breathing, beautiful little girls who called this place home and had learned to speak his native language from a mother who had every reason to hate everything about him. They were growing up in a world he knew nothing about, developing personalities he would never witness, achieving milestones he would never celebrate. The sound of their laughter still echoed in his ears as he picked up one of the abandoned coloring books. It fell open to a page where someone, probably Sophia, based on the careful attention to detail, had drawn a picture of 4 little girls holding hands under a rainbow. In the corner, barely visible, was a 5th figure that had been colored over so completely with black crayon that it was nothing but a dark smudge. Even in their artwork, he was an absence rather than a presence, a shadow rather than a father, a mistake to be covered over rather than a person to be celebrated. Dominic Ashford, master of the corporate universe, conqueror of markets and destroyer of competition, fell into the abandoned chair and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his adult life, his billions meant nothing. His power was useless. His reputation was worthless. He had found what he had lost, and it was more beautiful, more precious, more perfect than he had ever dared to imagine. 4 little girls with his eyes and their mother's heart, raised with love and sacrifice and everything he had been too much of a coward to provide. And they were running from him like he was the monster he had always been. The irony was devastating in its completeness. He had spent years building an empire designed to give him power over others, control over circumstances, influence over outcomes. But the most important people in his world, his own children, were completely beyond his reach, protected by a mother whose love was stronger than his wealth, whose courage was greater than his influence. For the first time since that terrible day in his office, Dominic Ashford was forced to confront the true cost of his choices. Not in dollars or market share or corporate valuations, but in 4 pairs of dark eyes that looked at him with fear instead of love, for little voices that called someone else Papa, for hearts that would grow up never knowing that their father had chosen his empire over their very existence. The weight of that realization should have crushed him. Instead, it ignited something he had thought was dead forever. The desperate, overwhelming need to fight for something more important than money or power or prestige. For the first time in his life, Dominic Ashford was about to discover what it meant to want something he couldn't buy, couldn't threaten into submission, couldn't acquire through hostile takeover. He was about to learn what it meant to fight for love. The abandoned coloring books haunted Dominic for precisely 47 minutes. He sat in that cafe chair, surrounded by the evidence of lives he had never been part of, watching families enjoy their Saturday morning while his world crumbled around him. Then the CEO who had built an empire through relentless determination made a decision that would either reunite him with his family or destroy any chance he had left. He canceled his flight to Tokyo without a second thought. The board meeting that had been scheduled for months, the acquisition deal worth hundreds of millions, the carefully orchestrated expansion into Asian markets, all of it became irrelevant in the face of 4 little girls who didn't know his name. His assistant's voice was professionally confused when he called to reschedule everything. "Sir, the Tokyo meeting represents 6 months of negotiations. The other parties have flown in specifically for this." "Cancel it," Dominic interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that brooked no argument. "Cancel everything for the next 2 weeks. I have more important business to attend to. More important than hundreds of millions in revenue. More important than global expansion. More important than everything he had spent his life building." Within 6 hours he had assembled a team of private investigators unlike any he had ever employed. These weren't the corporate security specialists who handled industrial espionage and competitor intelligence. These were former FBI agents, missing persons experts, specialists in finding people who had very good reasons for staying hidden. The difference was crucial, and he understood that now in ways he hadn't 4 years ago. His previous investigators had been looking for Camila Santos, recently unemployed executive assistant seeking abortion services. These new professionals were looking for a woman who had given birth to quadruplets and was raising them alone while actively avoiding detection. "I need everything," he told Marcus Reeves, the lead investigator whose resume included 15 years with the Bureau's Missing Persons Unit. "Where she lives, where she works, where the children go to school. Medical records, employment history, financial status. I need to understand her life completely." Marcus studied him with the calculating gaze of a man who had seen every type of client imaginable. "Most people who hire us to find someone want to know if that person is trying to hide from them specifically. Should I be concerned about the nature of this relationship?" The question was professionally necessary but personally devastating. "She's hiding from me because I gave her very good reasons to," Dominic admitted, the words tasting like acid. 4 years ago I was someone she needed protection from. I want to prove I'm not that person anymore. And if she doesn't want to be found? If she's built a life that doesn't include you?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Denver skyline. "Then I need to know that too. But I can't walk away without trying to make this right. It's incredible how becoming a father can change a man's priorities overnight, isn't it?" Dominic went from caring only about power to canceling million-dollar deals just for a chance to know his daughters. "What do you think of his transformation so far?" Within 72 hours, Marcus and his team had constructed a complete dossier on Camila's new life that was both impressive in its thoroughness and heartbreaking in its revelations. She had built her invisible existence with the same methodical precision that Dominic applied to corporate acquisitions, but her goal had been survival rather than conquest. The name change had been legally executed: Camila Santos Rivera, using her grandmother's surname from immigration records that predated the digital age. She had claimed identity theft to obtain new documentation, a lie that was both technically illegal and completely understandable given the circumstances. Hospital records painted a picture that made Dominic's chest tight with guilt. Premature birth at 34 weeks after months of high-risk pregnancy management. 2 months in the NICU with 4 babies fighting for their lives while their mother lived in the hospital, working on a laptop between feeding times and fighting insurance companies for coverage. The medical bills had been staggering, over $300,000 for the births and NICU stays alone. Charity care and Medicaid had covered what they could, but Camila had been making payments on the remainder for years, small amounts that barely touched the principal but kept the hospitals from turning the debt over to collection agencies. Employment records revealed the depth of her sacrifice. While pregnant, she had worked 3 jobs: house cleaning, tutoring, translation services, all paid in cash or under the table to avoid creating paper trails. After the births, she had fought for 18 months to get her social work license reinstated in Colorado, appeals and legal battles that had cost her thousands of dollars she couldn't afford. Her current job at the Mariposa Community Center paid barely above minimum wage, but it came with health insurance that covered her daughter's pediatric care. She worked 40 hours a week helping at-risk families navigate social services, immigrant families access resources, and abuse victims find safe shelter, the same kind of work that had taught her how to disappear in the first place. The financial analysis was sobering. She lived paycheck to paycheck, every dollar carefully budgeted between rent, groceries, childcare, and medical expenses. Her duplex in the Highlands neighborhood was small but clean, with a backyard just large enough for 4 little girls to play. The rent was $800 a month, which represented nearly half her income. She drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with 180,000 miles and 4 car seats that had been purchased secondhand. Her grocery receipts showed a diet heavy on rice, beans, and whatever proteins were on sale. She shopped at thrift stores for clothes, used the public library for internet access when her home connection was shut off for late payment, and had never taken her daughters on a vacation that cost more than a day trip to the zoo. Yet the surveillance photos showed 4 little girls who appeared happy, healthy, and completely loved. They attended a bilingual preschool program at the community center where their mother worked. They took art classes at the local recreation center and played in a soccer league where Camila volunteered as an assistant coach despite knowing nothing about the sport. Every activity, every small luxury, every opportunity she provided for her daughters came at the cost of something she sacrificed for herself. She wore the same 3 professional outfits on rotation, cut her own hair, and hadn't purchased a single item of clothing for herself in over a year according to credit card records. She had chosen poverty and anonymity over the wealth and security that child support from a billionaire could have provided, because she knew that money would come with strings attached to a man who had once threatened to destroy her. The photographs of his daughters playing in their small backyard were both wonderful and devastating. They looked exactly like him, the same dark hair, the same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around them. But they had their mother's warmth, her capacity for joy, her ability to find magic in simple moments. Everything he had almost destroyed. Everything he had chosen to walk away from. Why didn't she ever file for child support? Dominic asked Marcus, studying surveillance photos that showed Esperanza teaching her sisters to cartwheel in the grass. Marcus consulted his notes with professional detachment. According to her legal aid attorney from the license reinstatement case, she was specifically advised to pursue child support. She refused. When pressed, she said the father was dangerous, and that she preferred poverty to putting her children at risk. The words hit home because they were completely accurate. He had been dangerous, not physically but in every other way that mattered. His threats had been real, his power to destroy her had been absolute, and his willingness to use that power against a pregnant woman had been demonstrated beyond any doubt. Camila had made the rational choice to stay hidden rather than risk exposing her daughters to a man who had already proven himself capable of unthinkable cruelty. For 4 years she had lived completely off the grid of his world and it had worked perfectly. Her daughters were growing up safe, loved, and blissfully unaware that their biological father was one of the most powerful men in America. The irony was complete. While he had been building an empire designed to give him control over others, the most important people in his world had been living lives he knew nothing about, protected by a mother whose love was stronger than his wealth and whose courage was greater than his influence. Armed with this intelligence, Dominic began what could only be called a campaign, not the hostile takeover variety he was famous for, but something more like a siege conducted with infinite patience and careful strategy. He rented a modest apartment 3 blocks from Camila's duplex, close enough to be present but far enough to avoid the appearance of stalking. He studied his target the way he had once studied companies he wanted to acquire, learning her routines, her habits, her patterns of movement through the city. But unlike his corporate conquests, this research was motivated by love rather than greed, understanding rather than exploitation. Camila bought coffee every morning at 7:15 from a small cafe called Mountain Grounds, ordering the same medium roast with cream, no sugar. She dropped the girls at their preschool program at 8 o'clock, worked until 4:30, and picked them up for an hour at the playground before heading home for dinner and homework time. On Saturdays they went grocery shopping at the King Soopers on Federal Boulevard, where Camila used coupons and a calculator to keep her total under budget. On Sundays they attended Mass at St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church, where the girls fidgeted through the service but sang along enthusiastically with the Spanish hymns. For 3 days he simply observed, learning the rhythm of their lives and marveling at how full and rich their existence was despite its material limitations. His daughters were thriving under their mother's care, developing distinct personalities that shone through even from a distance. Esperanza was clearly the leader, the one who made decisions for the group and convinced her sisters to follow her into various adventures. Paloma was the questioner, constantly asking why and how about everything around her. Sofia was the artist, always carrying a small notebook where she sketched birds, flowers, and people they encountered. Isabella was the diplomat, the one who mediated disputes and made sure everyone felt included. They were perfect. They were his. And they had no idea he existed. On the 4th day he made his first approach. Camila emerged from Mountain Grounds at 7:18, 3 minutes later than usual, carrying her coffee and checking her phone for messages. When she looked up and saw him standing beside her car, her entire body went rigid with fear. "Hello, Camila." The greeting was simple, non-threatening, but her reaction was immediate and devastating. She stepped backward instinctively, her free hand moving to the pepper spray on her keychain, her eyes darting around the parking lot to identify potential escape routes. "What do you want, Dominic?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "To talk. We talked. For years ago. You made your position very clear." Each word was carefully controlled, but he could hear the years of suppressed anger underneath. "I saw them," he said quietly. "At the market. They're beautiful." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Stay away from my daughters. Our daughters." The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down, a claim that challenged everything she had built to protect them. Camila laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only years of pain and rage finally finding voice. "Our daughters? You mean the children you threatened me into aborting? The ones you said would ruin your precious merger? The babies you called a mistake and offered $50,000 to eliminate?" Each accusation was a blade, cutting deep into conscience he had tried to bury under years of corporate success. He deserved every word, every ounce of her fury, every bit of hatred she had carried for him. "I was wrong," he said simply. "You were evil." Her voice shook with suppressed emotion. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? What I sacrificed because of your threats? What they sacrificed because you were too much of a coward to be their father?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire he had started and could never put out. "Tell me," he said. "No." She started walking toward her car, but he followed, desperation making him bold. "You don't get to ease your conscience by hearing my sob story. You don't get absolution by listening to how hard it was to raise your children alone while you were building your empire." She reached her Honda-dented, weathered, but meticulously maintained, with its 4 car seats visible through the rear window. The contrast to his fleet of luxury vehicles was stark and damning. "Camila, please." She whirled on him, eyes blazing with an anger that had been simmering for 4 years. "Please what? Please forgive you? Please let you play daddy now that it's convenient? Please pretend you didn't try to destroy me and my children? They're my children too." The words came out wrong, possessive instead of pleading, and he watched her face harden into something he had never seen before. "You forfeited that right when you chose your company over their lives," she said with deadly quiet. "You forfeited it when you threatened to destroy my career. You forfeited it when you called them a mistake and offered me money to kill them." She opened her car door, but he grabbed it before she could close it, keeping it open through sheer desperation. "I can provide for them now," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Private schools, college funds, everything they need. We don't need your money." Her voice was ice over steel. "We needed you 4 years ago. We needed support and love and protection. Instead, you gave us threats and ultimatums and cruelty that nearly destroyed us both." "People change. Do they?" She studied his face with the intensity of a prosecutor examining evidence. Are you still the man who threatened to destroy my career if I didn't abort your children? Are you still the man who said he'd bury me in legal fees and public humiliation? The honest answer was too complex, too damning. He was still capable of ruthlessness when it served his purposes, still willing to use power as a weapon when threatened. But he was also something new, a man who had spent 4 years wondering what he had lost, slowly coming to understand that some things were more valuable than empires. I want a chance to make this right, he said finally. There is no making this right, she replied with finality that felt like a door slamming shut. There's only moving forward. And we've been doing that just fine without you. She slammed the car door and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot with the taste of failure in his mouth. But Dominic Ashford hadn't built an empire by accepting no for an answer, and he wasn't about to start now, not when the stakes were higher than they had ever been. What followed was a campaign of persistent presence that bordered on harassment but never quite crossed the line into illegality. Dominic appeared everywhere Camila went, never threatening, never aggressive, but always there, a constant reminder of the choice she had made to protect her daughters from him. At the coffee shop where she bought her morning latte, reading a newspaper at a corner table. Outside the preschool during pickup time, sitting in his rental car with obvious visibility. At the grocery store on Saturday mornings, shopping in the same aisles with the awkward precision of a man who had never done his own grocery shopping. This is harassment, she told him after the third encounter in 2 days, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. This is persistence, he replied, using the same tone he might employ in a difficult negotiation. I'll call the police. And tell them what? That your children's biological father wants to meet them. He paused, letting the legal implications sink in like acid in an open wound. I never signed away my parental rights, Camila. Because I never knew they existed. A family court judge might find that interesting. Her face went white, and he saw her instinctive step backward, the same fear response he had seen 4 years ago when he had used his power as a weapon against her. The realization of what he had just done hit him like a physical blow. No, he said quickly, desperately. God, no. I'm not. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. But the damage was done. She was looking at him exactly the way she had in his office 4 years ago, like he was a predator, a threat to everything she held dear, a monster wearing a human face. One conversation, he said, the words pouring out in a rush of desperation. That's all I want. Just to meet them. You set the terms, the time limit, the location, everything. I'll sign whatever legal document you want saying I won't pursue custody or visitation without your permission. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for something in his face, sincerity perhaps, or some guarantee that this time would be different. Why should I believe you? She asked. Because I finally understand what I lost. And I know that losing them completely would be worse than never having them at all. So you can what? Decide if they're worth your time? Judge whether they meet your standards. The accusation hit home because part of him had wondered the same thing. What if he didn't feel the instant connection everyone claimed came with fatherhood? What if seeing them in person didn't transform him the way it was supposed to? I just want to know them, he said quietly. Something in his tone must have reached her because her anger flickered, replaced by something that might have been pity. They ask about their father sometimes, she said finally, her voice soft with old pain. I tell them he wasn't ready to be a daddy when they were born. That someday maybe he might come back when he learned how to love them the way they deserve. The words were both a judgment and a challenge. I wasn't ready then, he admitted. And now you think you are? I think I want to try. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was searching for some evidence that the man who had threatened her had truly died and been replaced by someone capable of putting children before empire. One conversation, she said finally. 30 minutes. In my home with my rules. You hurt them, you disappoint them, you make them promises you can't keep, and I will make your corporate threats look like love letters. The promise should have intimidated him. Instead, it made him respect her even more than he already did. When? He asked. Tomorrow. 4 o'clock. And Dominic? She fixed him with a stare that could have cut glass. If you're not absolutely certain you're ready to be their father for the rest of their lives, don't knock on my door. Because they've been through enough disappointment for one lifetime. The 22 hours between Camila's agreement and the scheduled meeting felt like the longest day of Dominic's life. He had faced hostile takeovers, congressional hearings, and billion-dollar negotiations without breaking a sweat, but the prospect of meeting his daughters had him pacing his hotel room like a caged animal. He changed clothes 3 times, settling on dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, casual enough not to intimidate children, but still reflecting the respect he felt for this momentous occasion. He bought gifts, then returned them, realizing that showing up with expensive toys would send exactly the wrong message about his priorities and intentions. Instead, he stopped at a small bookstore near the university and selected 4 picture books, stories about brave princesses, magical kingdoms, and families that found each other against impossible odds. The irony of the last choice wasn't lost on him. Camilla's duplex was everything his penthouse wasn't. Where his home was sterile and cold, designed to impress rather than comfort, hers was warm and alive with the beautiful chaos that only children could create. Family photos covered every surface, 4 little girls growing from babies to toddlers, always together, always smiling. Children's artwork decorated the refrigerator like colorful badges of honor, and toys were scattered across the living room floor in patterns that spoke of recent play and hasty cleanup. The scent of something delicious simmered on the stove, probably the kind of home-cooked meal he hadn't tasted since his own childhood, and somewhere in the background, he could hear the soft murmur of cartoons playing on what sounded like an older television. When the quadruplets came home from their preschool program, chattering excitedly about their day in the mixture of English and Spanish that seemed to be their natural language, they stopped short at seeing a stranger in their living room. For pairs of dark eyes, his eyes, studied him with the frank curiosity that only children possessed. "Ninas," Camila said gently, kneeling to their eye level with the grace of a mother who had performed this ritual thousands of times. "Remember how you sometimes ask about your papa? This is him. This is Dominic." The silence that followed felt eternal. He could hear his heart hammering against his ribs, could feel sweat forming on his palms despite the cool afternoon air. Everything he had built, every success he had achieved, felt meaningless compared to this moment when 4 little girls would decide whether he was worthy of their trust. Paloma, apparently the boldest of the 4, stepped forward with the fearless confidence that reminded him painfully of himself at that age. "Are you really our daddy?" she asked, her head tilted with the serious consideration that children brought to important questions. Dominic knelt, bringing himself to eye level with his daughter, and felt his throat close with emotion he had never expected to experience. "Yes, sweetheart. I am." "Where have you been?" Sophia asked, her quiet voice carrying depths that reminded him uncomfortably of her mother during their most serious conversations. The question gutted him with its innocent directness. How could he explain 4 years of absence to a 3-year-old? How could he make her understand that he had been a coward when she was too young to even comprehend what cowardice meant? "I was working very far away," he said finally, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "But I'm here now. Did you bring presents?" Isabella wanted to know, her practical nature already asserting itself. He laughed despite the emotion choking him, recognizing something of himself in her direct approach to life. "Not today. But maybe next time if your mama says it's okay. Can you read us a story?" Esperanza asked shyly, holding up a worn picture book about brave princesses that looked like it had been read hundreds of times. He looked at Camila, who nodded reluctantly after a moment's hesitation. "One story." What followed was perhaps the most important 30 minutes of Dominic's life. His daughters climbed onto the couch beside him, for warm little bodies pressing against his sides with the trusting innocence that only children possessed. They smelled like sunshine and crayon wax and something uniquely sweet that he would later learn was the special shampoo Camila used because regular products irritated Paloma's sensitive skin. As he read about magical kingdoms and brave hearts, he felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. These weren't abstract concepts or business decisions or theoretical consequences of choices made in anger. They were his daughters, living, breathing, beautiful little girls who shared his DNA and their mother's capacity for unconditional love. When the story ended, Paloma looked up at him with enormous dark eyes that held all the hope in the world. "Will you come back tomorrow, Papa?" The word hit him like lightning. Papa. Not Dominic, not Mr. Ashford, but the most important title he had never thought he would hear. Something cracked apart in his chest, and he had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. "If your mama says it's okay," he managed. 4 hopeful faces turned to Camila like flowers following the sun. She sighed, and he caught something in her expression, a softening, like ice beginning to thaw after the longest winter. "We'll see," she said, but her tone held possibility that hadn't been there before. Days became weeks. Dominic rearranged his entire schedule around 4 little girls who had no idea they were worth billions. He learned to braid hair badly but with infinite patience, to referee playground disputes with diplomatic precision, and to read the same bedtime story 7 times in a row because Esperanza loved the part about the dragon who learned to be gentle instead of fierce. He discovered that Sofia was shy but brilliant, hiding depths of intelligence behind her quiet observations of the world. Paloma was fearless and funny, the natural leader who could convince her sisters to follow her into any adventure, no matter how questionable. Isabella was the peacemaker, the diplomat who could negotiate treaties between warring siblings over toy disputes with wisdom that belied her age. And Esperanza was pure hope incarnate, the optimist who saw magic in everything and believed the best of everyone she met. Most importantly, he learned that love wasn't about control or possession or bending others to your will. It was about service and sacrifice and showing up even when it was inconvenient, even when it meant missing board meetings or delaying million-dollar deals or restructuring your entire life around naptime schedules and preschool pickup times. Camila watched his transformation with guarded eyes, ready to intervene if he showed any sign of reverting to the man who had threatened her 4 years ago. But slowly, almost against her will, her walls began to crack like ice in spring sunshine. "You're different," she observed one evening after the girls were tucked into their beds with kisses and promises of pancakes for breakfast. They sat on opposite ends of her small couch, the space between them charged with history and possibility. The air felt electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm when everything held its breath in anticipation. "Fatherhood changes a man," he said, though the words felt inadequate to describe the complete reconstruction of his priorities that had occurred over the past few weeks. "Does it? Or did you just realize what your threats cost you?" Both, he thought, but didn't say it aloud. "What was it like?" he asked instead. "Carrying them alone. Raising them without help." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with old pain that had never fully healed. "Terrifying," she said. "Quadruplets meant constant medical monitoring, bed rest for months, wondering every day if they would survive. When they were born 6 weeks early, so tiny I was afraid to hold them." Her voice broke slightly. The image of her, alone and scared in a hospital room while their daughters fought for their lives, nearly broke him. "The NICU stay was 2 months. I lived in that hospital, working on my laptop between feeding times, fighting with insurance companies, trying to figure out how I'd afford everything they needed while having no idea if they would even survive." "I should have been there," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "Yes, you should have." The brutal honesty hung between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he could cross. "I can't undo the past, Camila. But I can be here now. For them. For you if you'll let me." She looked at him, then really looked, and he saw something shift in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of possibility. The moment of truth came on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after their first meeting. Dominic was helping Isabella with a puzzle while Camila prepared dinner, their domestic routine feeling surprisingly natural for something so new and fragile. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same puzzle piece, and the contact sent electricity shooting through both of them like touching a live wire. Time seemed to stop as they looked at each other, for years of suppressed longing and unresolved attraction crackling in the air between them. "Camila," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. She stood abruptly, but he caught her wrist gently, his thumb tracing over her pulse point where he could feel her heart racing. She turned, and suddenly they were inches apart, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to count the freckles across her nose that he had once kissed one by one. "We can't," she whispered, but her body betrayed her words, swaying toward him like iron drawn to a magnet. "Why?" "Because you destroyed me once. I won't let you do it again." The fear in her voice was real, rooted in experience that had taught her that love could be weaponized, that trust could be shattered, that the people who claimed to care about you could become your greatest threats. "I won't. I swear to you I won't." When their lips met, it was like touching a live wire that completed a circuit that had been broken for 4 years. She tasted like memory and possibility, like everything he had lost and desperately wanted back. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed warnings about history repeating itself. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching in the intimate way of lovers who had found each other again across an ocean of pain. "This is dangerous," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is inevitable," he replied, his hands cupping her face like he was holding something infinitely precious. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet that only came after bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, she came to him where he sat on the couch, staring at family photos and wondering how he had been such a fool. She wore a simple white nightgown that made her look ethereal in the dim light of the living room lamps, like an angel offering redemption to someone who didn't deserve it but desperately needed it anyway. "I've missed you," she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her heart. The words broke something loose in his chest that had been locked away for 4 years. "I've missed you every day since you walked out of my office." She came to him then, moving with the same grace he remembered from their stolen moments in New York, straddling his lap while her hands cupped his face with infinite tenderness. "If we do this, if we try again, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never use your power against me again. Promise me you'll never threaten what we're building here. I promise. Promise me you'll never leave them. Even if things don't work out between us, even if we can't make this work, you'll never abandon our daughters." The weight of the promise settled on his shoulders like a sacred vow. "I promise." She searched his eyes, looking for truth, for sincerity, for some guarantee that this time would be different, that love would be stronger than ambition, that family would matter more than empire. "I'm terrified of trusting you again," she whispered. "Then don't trust me yet. Let me earn it." What followed was a careful reconstruction of intimacy between two people who had loved and lost and were brave enough to try again. When she kissed him this time, it was with the passion of a woman who had been alone too long and the desperation of someone choosing to believe in love despite every reason not to. They made love that night with the intensity of two souls finding their way back to each other across an ocean of pain and regret. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a pledge, every whispered endearment a vow to do better, be better, love better than they had before. He worshipped her with his hands and lips and whispered apologies against her skin, telling her without words how sorry he was for the years they had lost, the love they had wasted, the family he had almost destroyed through his own cowardice and pride. She gave herself to him with a trust that humbled him, opening not just her body but her heart to the possibility that some mistakes could be forgiven, some wounds could heal, some love could survive even the cruelest betrayal. Afterward, as she lay curled against his chest with her breathing soft and even, Dominic stared at the ceiling and made a silent promise to the universe. He would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of the second chance she was giving him, worthy of the love his daughters offered so freely, worthy of the family he had been too much of a fool to embrace the first time. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice drowsy with satisfaction and possibility. "Now we build something better than what we had before. Something worthy of them. Something worthy of you." She lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes, he saw the future they could have if he was brave enough to reach for it and strong enough to hold on to it. "I love you," he said, the words rusty with disuse but true as gravity. "I love you too," she whispered back. "God help me, I never stopped." The admission hung between them like a benediction, a forgiveness he didn't deserve but would spend his lifetime trying to earn. What followed was not the fairy tale reunion that movies promised, but something more real, more difficult, and ultimately more beautiful, the careful reconstruction of love from the ashes of betrayal. Dominic didn't simply move back into Camila's life. He earned his way back, one day at a time, one small act of devotion at a time, one proof of his transformation at a time. The changes began immediately and were both practical and profound. Within a week, he had established a satellite office in Denver, transferring key operations from New York and learning to run his empire remotely. The corporate world was initially skeptical. Dominic Ashford, the man who had built his reputation on being personally present for every major decision, was suddenly delegating authority and missing meetings for something as mundane as preschool pickup. His board of directors questioned his judgment. Financial journalists speculated about his health, his mental state, his commitment to the company. Stock prices fluctuated as investors wondered whether the youngest CEO in corporate history was having some kind of breakdown. Let them wonder, he decided. For the first time in his adult life, he had found something more important than market share and quarterly profits. He bought a house 3 blocks from Camila's duplex, not a mansion designed to impress, but a family home with a backyard perfect for 4 little girls to play in, a kitchen designed for cooking actual meals rather than catering impressive dinners, and bedrooms that could accommodate overnight visits when the time was right. The distance was carefully calculated. Close enough to be present for every moment that mattered, far enough to give Camila the space she needed to learn to trust again. He understood now that trust, like love, couldn't be demanded or purchased. It had to be earned through consistent action over time. The quadruplets adapted to having a father with the resilience that only children possessed. They absorbed his presence into their lives like sunshine after a long rain, never questioning why he had been absent, only celebrating that he was there now. Their capacity for unconditional love both humbled him and terrified him. What if he disappointed them? What if he proved unworthy of their trust? But gradually, as days became weeks and weeks became months, he learned that fatherhood wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up consistently, listening carefully, and loving unconditionally even when, especially when, it was inconvenient. He attended every preschool event, sometimes via video conference from whatever city his business had taken him to, but more often in person, sitting in tiny plastic chairs surrounded by other parents who had no idea they were chatting with a billionaire about finger painting and playground politics. He learned the intricate schedule of 4 different personalities. Sophia had swimming lessons on Tuesdays and needed encouragement to overcome her shyness around new instructors. Paloma played soccer on Saturdays and required someone to run alongside the field cheering loudly enough to be heard over her own competitive spirit. Isabella took piano lessons on Thursdays and performed her practice pieces for anyone willing to listen with the seriousness of a concert pianist. Esperanza had art classes on Wednesdays and came home covered in paint, clay, or glitter depending on the day's creative focus. Every doctor's appointment, every school conference, every milestone was sacred to him now. He kept a calendar on his phone dedicated entirely to his daughter's schedules, and his corporate assistant learned that nothing, not board meetings, not merger negotiations, not emergency calls from Tokyo, took precedence over a sick child or a school play. When Sophia had nightmares about monsters under her bed, he spent 3 nights sleeping on her bedroom floor until she felt safe again. When Paloma broke her arm falling off the monkey bars, he canceled a trip to London to stay home and sign her cast with silly drawings. When Isabella got sick with strep throat, he held her hair back while she threw up and didn't even flinch when she got sick all over his $1,000 suit. These weren't grand gestures or dramatic declarations of love, they were the small, daily acts of devotion that actually built families. And somewhere in the middle of braiding hair badly and burning grilled cheese sandwiches, Dominic Ashford discovered who he had always been meant to be. The corporate world eventually stopped questioning his new priorities and started adapting to them. His assistant learned to schedule meetings around school pickup times. His board meetings were rescheduled to accommodate dance recitals. His private jet was equipped with car seats and a supply of juice boxes for family trips. Surprisingly, his business didn't suffer from his divided attention. It actually improved. Employees who had once feared his ruthless perfectionism found him more approachable, more understanding of work-life balance, more willing to make decisions that prioritized long-term stability over short-term profits. "You're different," his longtime CFO observed during a quarterly review. "Calmer. More human." The observation was accurate. Success still mattered to him, but it no longer defined him. Profit was important, but not more important than being home for bedtime stories. Power was useful, but not as satisfying as hearing 4 little voices call him Papa. The press eventually discovered the story. Billionaire CEO's secret quadruplets made for irresistible headlines, but Dominic handled the media attention differently than he would have in his previous life. No threats, no cover-ups, no attempts to control the narrative through intimidation or legal maneuvering. Instead, he held a press conference that would be remembered as one of the most honest moments in corporate history. Standing at a podium with cameras flashing like stars, he spoke directly to every person who had ever chosen fear over love, ambition over connection, pride over the possibility of happiness. 4 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to confess to the world. I let fear and pride override love and responsibility. When the woman I loved told me she was carrying my children, I threatened her and tried to force her to end her pregnancy because I was terrified of looking weak, of appearing vulnerable, of having my carefully constructed empire threatened by something as human as family. The room was dead silent, every reporter hanging on his words as he continued the most important speech of his career. She was braver than I was. She chose love over fear, hope over despair, and she raised our daughters alone while I built an empire that meant nothing without them. For 4 years, Camila Santos showed more courage in a single day than I had shown in my entire life. He paused, looking directly into the cameras, speaking to every person who had ever made choices they regretted, ever hurt people they loved, ever wondered if redemption was possible. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, that's not something that can be demanded or negotiated. I'm here to publicly acknowledge what I should have said 4 years ago. Camila Santos is the mother of my children, and she's the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever known. Our daughters, Esperanza, Sofia, Isabella, and Paloma, are the greatest achievement of my life, even though I had nothing to do with creating who they are. The press conference made headlines around the world, not just for its corporate implications but for its raw honesty about love, redemption, and the courage required to admit when you've been catastrophically wrong. Some praised his honesty. Others criticized his past behavior. Most were simply amazed that someone with his power and wealth had been willing to publicly admit such devastating personal failures. But the only opinions that mattered to him were those of 4 little girls who didn't care about headlines or stock prices, who only cared that their papa kept his promises to read bedtime stories and attend dance recitals and love them exactly as they were. 18 months after that first terrifying meeting in Camila's living room, Dominic asked her to marry him. Not with a grand gesture or an expensive ring, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening while they were doing dishes together after dinner, their daughters playing in the living room nearby. "I want to make this official," he said simply. "Not because we need a piece of paper to be a family, but because I want the world to know that you and our daughters are the most important thing in my life." She said yes while soap bubbles dripped from her hands, and their engagement was celebrated with squeals of delight from 4 little girls who immediately began planning their roles as flower girls. The wedding was held in their backyard on a perfect autumn day, with 4 flower girls in matching purple dresses who took their duties very seriously. When Dominic kissed his bride, Esperanza shouted, "Finally!" and the entire gathering erupted in laughter that sounded like joy itself. That night, as Camila curled against his chest in their bedroom, "Truly there's now no more separate houses, no more careful distance, no more guards against heartbreak," she whispered the question that had haunted her for years. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd been too scared to leave? If I'd taken your threats seriously and stayed in New York?" He tightened his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair and the reality of their impossible love story. "I think about it every day. And I thank God you were braver than I was." "Promise me something," she said, the same request she had made so many times during their careful reconstruction of trust. "Anything. Promise me you'll tell them the truth someday. About how we started, about your threats, about everything. They deserve to know their mother chose them over everything else, but they also deserve to know their father was capable of change." "I promise. And I'll make sure they know that their father was a coward who nearly lost the most precious thing in the world, but who learned that real power comes from the courage to love without conditions." She kissed his chest, right over his heart. "But you found your way back to us. You let me find my way back. That's the miracle." Outside their window, Denver sparkled in the distance, but Dominic's empire felt small compared to the kingdom they had built together. 4 little girls who filled their home with laughter and chaos and the daily miracles of childhood. A love that had survived the worst kind of betrayal to become something stronger and more beautiful than either had dared to hope. The cold-hearted CEO was gone forever, replaced by a man who had learned that the most important deals couldn't be negotiated in boardrooms, that the greatest acquisitions couldn't be purchased with money, and that real success was measured not in dollars or market share, but in bedtime kisses and family dinners and the trust of 4 little girls who called him Papa. From the ashes of his cruelest mistake had grown the greatest love story of his life. A reminder that sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what truly matters, and that love, when given a second chance, can transform even the hardest heart into something capable of infinite tenderness. If this story moved you, show some love with a like and make sure you're subscribed to Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives for more incredible tales of love conquering all. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our stories. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the transformative power of unconditional love.